Welcome back to the Postpartum Plan podcast. This podcast is designed to support and empower you through postpartum. Whether you're expecting, in the early postpartum days, or beyond, this space is for you. I'm your host, Madison Fugere, a dedicated postpartum doula and pediatric sleep consultant, striving to help parents feel confident and supported in their parenting journey. Each week, I'm sharing practical tips and expert advice to help you navigate all the postpartum things with confidence. Well, as much confidence as you can. Let's embark on this journey together, making your parenthood as serene and supportive as possible. Alyssa is a second-generation birth doula, childbirth educator, spinning babies parent coach, and the co-owner of Saltwater Doulas. She's been teaching childbirth education to families over the last 5 years. Alyssa truly believes that knowledge is power, and the key to an empowering birth and postpartum experience is prenatal education. She's a mother of 2 girls, and their births inspired her to enter into the field of birth work herself. Hi, Alyssa. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Excited to be here.
We say that as if we weren't just talking for like 30 minutes before this. But I'm so excited to have Alyssa here today. Alyssa's like an amazing human being and has so many things that she knows and does. And so it's exciting to have you here. I know that we were trying to kind of figure out a topic and there's like so many things that we could talk about. So we decided to kind of start from square one and have you kind of share a bit about, your birth and postpartum experience and how that got you into the field that you are today. So, your bio will play before this, but do you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself and all that to start?
Sure. So I am a childbirth educator. That was kind of like my number one thing that I started with. I'm certified through Boston Association for Childbirth Education. I also just did my evidence-based birth instructor certification. So that's another one I've just been working on. I'm a spinning babies parent educator, and I'm a birth doula, and I own a doula agency.
That's so exciting. You guys have so many things and so many exciting things coming. So if people are nearby, definitely have to check it out. But that's awesome. So do you want to start by telling us a little bit about what pre-baby life was like? And then, I know that you have a very unique childhood experience in relation to this. So if you want to share a little bit about that. But yeah, tell us about what pre-baby was like and then what it was like to find out that you were pregnant the first time and all that.
Sure. So I grew up thinking that everybody had a doula and everyone went to the birth center and had a midwife and had their babies there, because my mom is also a birth doula and a postpartum doula and a lactation consultant. So I attended my first birth at 6 years old and then my second birth at 11 years old because I was there for both of my brothers' births. When I was 6, I was not very involved with the birth. For my brother, when I was 11 years old, I actually helped cut the umbilical cord and I was in the room the whole time. So yeah, totally thought that was normal that everyone did that. And then as I got older, I realized we were the weird family. And so that I was cool with that. I'm always cool with being the weird one. But I always said I was never going to have kids, and I didn't understand why my mom was a doula. And that was kind of my life up until I was 21 years old and I met my husband. And we got married very shortly after. So we were only 23 when we got married. This is will be our 10-year anniversary this year.
Oh my goodness.
And about 2 years after we got married, he didn't decide, but I decided that we were going to have a baby. Because my mom was a young mom and I really always wanted to have children before I was 30, be done having kids, which I completed by 2 weeks, just throwing that out there.
Nice.
So we started trying and we were very fortunate that we got pregnant the first month that we started trying. I was tracking my fertility for a couple of months ahead of time, but so yeah.
That's awesome.
I peed on a pregnancy stick, and before I even called my husband, I called my mom and I said, I think I'm pregnant. And my mom said, why? And I said, because I just took a pregnancy test and it's positive. She was like, okay,
I think I'm pregnant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, that was kind of like our story of getting pregnant. And then my pregnancy was pretty uneventful. I didn't really have any morning sickness or nausea. I almost was like, am I really pregnant? But after a couple of months, I definitely felt pregnant because I gained a whole lot of weight during that pregnancy. So I actually gained 65 pounds
Oh
during
my
my first
goodness.
pregnancy. So I felt very pregnant very early on. And I
And you're a
didn't,
small human too.
yeah, I am a small human. I am 5 feet tall, and I think I weighed like 115 pounds when I got pregnant with my first. So, so it was a big change, and I didn't necessarily love being pregnant, which I think more people definitely need to share because
Yeah.
I always hear like it's beautiful and it's glorious, but I was like not feeling that way, and I felt really heavy, and I didn't feel like I was like as connected to my friends as I had been because I couldn't go out. We were 23 years old, 24 years old. All of our friends were like going out drinking and going
Yeah.
traveling, and I was home pregnant. So I didn't necessarily love it, but I was really excited for labor. Because all of my family and all of my cousins and my mom all had birth center births at the Cambridge Hospital, which is no longer doing births, unfortunately. So I was planning an unmedicated birth at the birth center, and I really wanted to have a water birth. And my mom said, you have to take this childbirth class. That's my friend that's a doula does this class, and it's the best class. So I went and did a childbirth class, and it was in the doula's home. She did it in her living room, and there was 4 couples, and this was like 8 years ago now, and we all are still connected on social media.
Oh,
And actually one of the other couples, the mom became a doula too
oh
after
my
she had,
gosh.
so it's kind of cool. But I learned so much in that class, and the instructor was telling us about this new thing that she was getting into called spinning babies. And if anyone's familiar with spinning babies at all, Lorenza, who teaches all the spinning babies classes, that was who I did my childbirth class with. So Lorenza was like, I'm getting into this new thing called spinning babies. I'm learning so much about it. And she was telling us all about spinning babies, and I was like, oh, my baby's Breech right now. And she was like, oh, I need someone to come and do this like modeling thing for my spinning babies class. Do you want to come? And I was like, sure. So I went with Lorenza, and she did all the spinning baby stuff to me. And at my next appointment, my baby had flipped head down. So I was like, oh, cool. Spinning babies works.
Nice.
And I was like 35 weeks at that point. So it was getting like a little bit late in the game, but I was just like, oh, I have a breech baby. Like, no big deal. They'll flip. So yeah, so that was kind of like my pregnancy part of
That's
it.
so cool.
Yeah.
When
Um,
you were taking that class and like hearing about and experiencing yourself this like spinning baby stuff, was it something that you were like, oh, like I want to do that? Because I know you said like before having babies, you're like, nah, babies, nah, working as a
no,
doula.
even through my first pregnancy, like I spent most of my life working with animals. So I worked with exotic animals like alligators and snakes and things like that. And then I lived in the city for a while in Boston, and I did dog walking. So I did off-leash dog training for many years. And then we had moved, and I had gotten into corporate catering, and I was working in sales in corporate catering, and that's
You
what I
were
was
all
doing.
over the place.
Yeah. I was doing throughout my pregnancy. Oh, if I put a resume of like every job I've ever had, it would be a very, very interesting
Oh
resume.
my
But
gosh.
yeah, no, I was in no way, shape, or form like involved in the birth world any more than just having like talking to my mom about things and
Right.
doing it myself. So at that point, I was not even on the trajectory to becoming a childbirth educator or doula.
Right.
So I was like, oh, this is spinning babies thing is cool. It worked, but
Yeah.
like we flipped my breech baby, and that's what it's
Right.
for, right?
Right.
So it wasn't really anything more than that at that point. But it did flip my breech baby, so I was excited about that, right?
Yeah.
And then yeah, so that was kind of like my pregnancy. My due date came and then went. And then
As most first-time babies do, right?
and then another week went by and I was 41 weeks and I was still pregnant. I had my 41-week appointment and they were like, oh, you're having contractions. They did like a non-stress test and they were like, oh, you're having contractions. And I was like, oh, I can't really feel them. And then me and my husband went out for Indian food after. And while we were sitting in the restaurant, I was like, I think I can feel contractions now. So I was starting to get like a little bit crampy. We went home, we kind of like packed some stuff. We ate dinner. I was still crampy, went kind of tried to go to bed, wasn't really falling asleep. I eventually called my mom over. This was like a Friday night. So I called my mom over because she was gonna obviously come to my birth because she was my doula. And so I called her. She came over around 9. We kind of just hung out in the living room. This was before we had like tons of streaming stuff. I mean, it was only 8 years ago, but there really wasn't as much like streaming stuff back then. Right. We were watching like HBO and Forrest Gump was on, and Forrest Gump is like a really long movie, right? It's like a 3.5 hour movie. We watched it 3 times in a row.
Oh
because
my
like,
gosh.
the middle of the night. So it just like kept
repeating.
Back to back. So we watched Forrest Gump 3 times in a row. My husband slept the whole time.
Oh my gosh.
And my mom. And then the next morning, my contractions had like really picked up and I was like getting pretty uncomfortable. We lived in Peabody at the time and had to drive to Cambridge. So it was the morning time. We were like, why don't we just go see how things are going? I was feeling all of my contractions in my back. So I was having really bad back labor. And we got to the hospital or to the birth center and I was 2 centimeters dilated. So at the birth center, you have to at least be 6 centimeters for them to admit you. They don't admit you that early. So basically they were like, sorry, gotta go home. So we drove back to Peabody. This is Saturday morning. We labored all day. And then Sunday morning, I was still like really uncomfortable. My contractions were really close together. They were still all in my back. We drove back to the birth center. And I was 3 centimeters dilated. So they were like, sorry, but we're going to have to send you home again. And I was like, no, I'm not driving home again. So at that point, I had made the decision to transfer to the hospital, which was just right across the street, so that I could get some therapeutic rest. Do you know what that is?
Tell us about it. Tell the listeners.
So there's actually a funny story. Talk about this in my childbirth class. Therapeutic rest is something that they offer typically in early labor to parents who need to sleep. So if you're having like a really long early stage of labor like I was, or if you're having prodromal labor, or sometimes during an induction, they'll offer you therapeutic sleep. It's basically a narcotic that they give you. So a lot of the times it's like morphine or Stadol or Dilaudid. Sometimes they use fentanyl. Those things can help to make you kind of not care about the contractions enough that you can get some rest. They really just like relax your whole body. But they don't take the pain away. So it's not something that you would use in later labor because it doesn't necessarily take your pain away. And it also crosses the placenta and it can affect the baby too. So they don't like to give it too close to delivery because they don't want your baby to be groggy and sleepy like you are when they're born. So a lot of people don't know what therapeutic rest is because they call it something to help you sleep or therapeutic rest. And they're just like, that sounds great.
Right.
They actually did a survey in 2016 and they asked like 1,000 women if they had therapeutic sleep during their labor. And only 16, or they asked them if they had intramuscular or IV narcotics during their labor. And only 16% of people said yes. And they were like, that sounds really low. So they went back and looked at the medical records, and they actually found that closer to 60% of people
Oh my
had
gosh.
labor. And the reason there was such a discrepancy was because people literally did not know what they were getting because it was just called therapeutic sleep.
That's
which
crazy.
is wild. But a lot of people hear like IV narcotics and they're like, oh no, I don't want that in labor.
Right.
And it's understandable, but it really does have a place. So for people who are experiencing that prodromal labor or long induction, or for people who are having like a really long early labor, it is going to be impossible to achieve your labor goals if you are exhausted.
Right.
So sometimes in that early stage of labor, it really is a great option to be able to kind of just get some rest and reset. So that's what I did. I got morphine, and one of the side effects of morphine are sometimes it affects your ability to pee. So that was really fun.
Oh gosh.
I got to get a straight catheter for the first time to empty my bladder. So that was a great experience. So that's another thing I always like people to know is some of those narcotics can cause some other side effects. So it's important to know not just that you're getting a narcotic, but which narcotic it is so that you can kind of make that informed choice. And we slept for a while, and my labor like continued to progress. By this time it was like afternoon on Sunday. I was still really tired even after that like short sleep that I got. And I was still having like all of my contractions were in my back, and I was really uncomfortable, and my water birth, home birth goal ended up turning into me choosing to get an epidural. So I got an epidural, and we all slept. My husband said it was like the craziest thing you had witnessed because there was like doing all this labor support, and I was throwing up, and he was like on edge the whole time. And then I got the epidural, and we all just kind of like hung out, and he was like, "Can I go get something to eat now?"
Like all of a sudden the room is calm. Yeah.
So yeah, we got an epidural. We watched a little bit of Law and Order SVU.
Love that.
I don't know why I remember all of like the
It's
show.
those details. It's those details.
And then we woke up probably at like 5 a.m. on Monday morning. And my midwife checked me, and I was fully dilated, and it was time to have a baby. And we knew we were having a girl. What we did not know is that we were having a very large girl. That very large daughter of mine is still very stubborn, but she was very stubborn during the labor process. She had been in a OP position, or sunny side up position, throughout my whole labor. And so that's why I was having that back labor, because her head was pushing on my sacrum the entire time. I was in labor, and she decided she was going to be born that way, which is not an ideal way to push a baby out. But after I don't know if you've added up those days, but after my 3-day labor, I was determined at this point to just have a baby. So I pushed with all of my might, and I had a baby in 15 minutes, which is very rare.
Wow.
For a first-time parent with an epidural to be able to push in 15 minutes. It's also not ideal to push a baby out that fast. So I did have like significant tearing from that delivery. Not just because I pushed really fast, but also because she was born in that OP position. And she also weighed 9 pounds, 8 ounces. So,
oh my gosh. And again, to go back to you being little 5 foot, tiny little human. Oh my gosh.
Yep.
Now, during this whole like story that you've been telling, I have a question.
Yeah.
What did it feel like? And like, did you have to get over like a mental block from being like, okay, I'm gonna have this water birth with the midwives, to being like, okay, I'm gonna go to the hospital, and then to being like, okay, I'm gonna get this epidural. Like, that's not that they're like total opposites, but when you've had your mindset and like seen these types of specific water births since like childhood, and then all of a sudden you're now doing this other option, I know that that can be like a really hard mental switch, especially when you're like experiencing pain. What was that like? Like, how did you help yourself like rationalize that?
So I definitely was, I don't want to say disappointed, but I was like grieving that I didn't get to have that experience. But at the same time, because I took that amazing childbirth education class and I learned so much about all of the different tools and all of the different options. And I felt like the entire time nobody was telling me what to do. Like I made all of those choices for myself.
Yeah.
And I also knew that that is what I needed at that moment. So in the moment, I really did not feel like disappointed or upset or anything like that. I just felt like I was making the choices that I needed to make. I didn't have like a very easy labor. And so I, kept telling myself like if things had gone differently, then I maybe would have been able to have that experience. But this is just the way that my labor played out. And these were the things that I needed to do. And I felt okay with that. I did have a lot of postpartum anxiety with my first daughter. So I didn't necessarily feel like I had postpartum depression. But I definitely had postpartum anxiety and I definitely had some postpartum OCD. Everything needed to be exactly the way that I wanted it to be. And my husband could not do anything right with the baby. So that was really hard to get over. I had like I did not sleep, I think, for the first 2 weeks because my anxiety was so bad. I did not leave my house with my baby for probably 2 months alone. My mom would come and pick me up and take me she was teaching like a new moms group at the Cambridge Birth Center at that time. And she would stop and pick me up on her way and take me to her group. And I would go hang out with all the moms there. I was still getting out of the house because I had a really great support system, but I did have a lot of postpartum stuff going on. So it was nice to have my mom there to help me to be able to like identify it. We had some issues breastfeeding too. So that I'm sure that played a little bit of a role in it as well. But we got over it and I did breastfeed her for like almost 3 years. So it
Oh my
worked.
gosh.
It worked out in the end, but yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's gotta be so interesting. And like, what was it like having it just sounds like you and your mom just have like a very different, like so close relationship. But like, what was it like having her there for you during that time? Like a lot of moms are there for, births if parents want them to be there, obviously. But I think that like in this case, like she wasn't just there as a mom, she was there as like like someone who understood everything that was going on. Like, did it ever feel like, oh my gosh, mom, shut up? Or like, was it like really like soothing to have her there?
Oh, it was definitely helpful to have her there. She was really nervous that she would not be able to like appropriately doula me
Yeah.
because she is my mom. So I actually did also have another doula who
Yep.
was kind of like, it was my mom's friend and she was kind of just coming and going. So she wasn't there for my entire birth. Um, pop in a couple of times.
Yep.
Um, and yeah, no, my mom was great. My mom is a really intuitive person. So she knows like what she should and should not be doing, especially in that moment.
Right.
She also knows what makes me mad. So I think she definitely was able to like put those things, like anything that she knew would irritate me, like she put aside, which as a birth doula, I can say not all moms do that in the labor room. So it's definitely important to think about like why you want your mom in the labor room and what benefit it's going to be for you. And you're not just doing it to please them. Because it is an experience where you need support. And if anyone is there that is not there to support you, it's not going to be beneficial for your experience. But my mom was great. And that's unique to our situation. We are
Right.
really close. My mom had me when she was really young, so we've always been like really close and age too, which is nice.
Yeah.
And now she's still young and can take care of my her grandchildren while I'm on call now because I did a
That's so
lot of
awesome.
babysitting for her when my brothers were younger and she was a birth doula. Lots of
Right.
like, can you pick the boys up at school? And me like 16, like, oh, fine, mom. But
Right.
I'm getting payback for that now because she babysits for me at 5 a.m. sometimes.
Oh my
So
gosh.
so yeah, so it was really great having her there. And I'm really glad I had her there postpartum as well. And
Yeah.
then kind of like more of my story about like how I got into birth work comes from my second pregnancy.
Go for it. Tell us.
Yeah. So I mentioned that I breastfed my older daughter for a pretty long time. So I actually didn't get my period back until I was 18 months postpartum, which is
Wow.
like pretty long time. And I knew I always wanted to have two kids. I did not want to just have like a single child, and I wanted to have them close together. There's really big age gaps with me and my brother, and so I kind of wanted to just be done with. Also didn't enjoy pregnancy, so I was like, I just want to get this over with again.
Yeah.
And even looking back on my labor experience, like I don't feel like I hated it, and I wasn't like nervous about going through labor again, but I was excited to prepare in different ways this time. So I finally got my period back, and we're gonna start trying to get pregnant. And then my best friend was getting married in August. So I was like, all right, I don't want to be like newly pregnant at my best friend's wedding. Like, I'm her maid of honor, so we'll start trying in September. And we got pregnant right away again. So we're really lucky in that aspect. And I did do a lot of like fertility awareness training, and I had been practicing fertility awareness method for a while. So I was like very in tune with my cycle, and I think that played a big role in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got pregnant right away again. I was still breastfeeding. So I felt a lot better during this pregnancy, I think, because I was not eating every single cake at the Italian bakery next door. During this pregnancy, like once a week during my first pregnancy, we would try a different cake from the Italian bakery that we lived next to,
I
and
love it.
contributed to my weight gain in my first pregnancy. But I was active. I was much more active. I had a toddler, and I was chasing her around, and we decided not to find out the gender of this baby, which was fun. Once I got to about like 30 weeks pregnant was when we weaned my older daughter, because I was like, I need a break from this for a little bit before we're gonna do it again. So my girls have a 2-year, 9-month age gap. So it was like right around that time that we stopped breastfeeding. My husband got to do all of like the night weaning, sleeping with our toddler, and I got like the whole bed to myself and my pregnant belly, and that was kind
You're
of
like, I sacrificed enough. It's your turn.
exactly. So yeah, so my pregnancy was great. I was super active. At that point was when I was kind of like thinking about doing some childbirth ed stuff. I really felt so empowered by that class that I had taken, that I wanted to be able to share that with my friends who are now starting to get pregnant as well. So during my pregnancy, I did my childbirth ed training, which was, I think it's like a 16-week training.
Wow.
And it was all in person, because this was before COVID times when we did things in person.
Right. Now it's
And
absurd.
so it was all in person. So I drove, we lived in Amesbury at the time. I drove all the way to Newton Wellesley Hospital once a week for 16
Wow.
weeks throughout my pregnancy to go to this training. And it was such an awesome training. I highly recommend the base training to anyone who's looking to become a childbirth educator. It's so thorough. Shari, who's the instructor, is just like amazing. So it was kind of fun to like be pregnant and do that like really intensive childbirth ed training. Because I was like thinking, oh, I'm going to use this for my class, but I was also thinking like, oh, this is great information for me as well.
Right.
And so during that training, I realized towards the end that this baby was also breech. And so I had gained a lot less weight with this pregnancy. I think I only gained 30 pounds this time. But I still had like a pretty big belly. And at 36 weeks, she was confirmed with an ultrasound to be breech. And I was like, oh my goodness, not again. I'm like planning this birth center birth this time. I'm so determined. I've been doing all of this like research and education. Like, I'm not going to have a breech baby. So I went back to spinning babies because it worked the first time. And I realized there was actually like so much more to spinning babies at that point than just flipping your breech baby. So I did use it for that. But then after I confirmed she was head down at I think I was like 36 weeks and like 6 days or something. I had been like calling all the hospitals trying to find breech providers that would deliver my baby breech because I was like, I'm not having a C-section after all of this work. And we confirmed that she was in fact head down after doing the spinning babies for 6 days. It worked
Wow.
like immediately. So that was great. And then I continued doing spinning babies for the rest of my pregnancy. So I was doing all of the daily balances and I was walking like 2 to 3 miles every single day. My second child was born in the end of June. So it was like prime time to be like out
Nice.
around. So we were doing all of the things. I was also very determined to not go beyond 41 weeks pregnant again this time because that last week and a half was like really, really tough. And so I was doing tons of walking. We live about like a mile and a half from our like center of town. So we would walk into town and like get a coffee or get a snack. And then we would walk back every single day when my husband got home from work. That's what we did.
Yeah.
And the weekend before we went into labor, there was like a brewery festival or something in the town that my mom lives in. And we like went there and they had face painting and bouncy houses. And there was like the whole town was there. We spent the whole day outside. And then we actually slept at my mom's that night. And the next day we went to like a water park splash pad thing with my daughter. And I just have this picture of me with like this massive pregnant belly. I was 40 weeks. I think that was my due date. I was like exactly 40 weeks and I just have this giant belly and I'm in a bikini standing in like the little wading pool because I was so hot.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, we just did like so much moving around. So that was a Sunday. So I had my 40-week appointment on Monday and I went in and I was like, my first pregnancy, I didn't get any cervical checks throughout my pregnancy because I was like, I don't really need that. But this time I had all this knowledge from taking the childbirth class and it was really just like the nerd in me wanted to know like what my cervix was doing. I knew it wouldn't necessarily tell me anything, but I just really wanted to know. So I had a cervical exam and I was like, I want a membrane sweep because I do not want to go to 41 weeks pregnant again. So like I'm choosing to do this, like I want you to do this. And the midwife was not very confident that she did like a very good membrane sweep. And she was like, I don't think this really worked. Like, I think we should schedule your 41-week appointment. And I was so upset. So we walked from the birth center over to this like Mexican restaurant. My mom like wanted to go to this Mexican restaurant. She would come with us for that appointment because my husband wanted to come in with me, but we also had our daughter. And so my mom was kind of hanging out with my daughter. And so we all walked and got Mexican food. And I like thought the place was kind of like gross. I was like, Mom, why did you bring us here? Like, I don't know, the floor was like dirty. And I was like, you're trying to give me like food poisoning when I'm 40 weeks pregnant. And so we had Mexican food. We came home. And then that night, it was like maybe 5 p.m. And I was like, my stomach hurts so bad. Like, I was like, that Mexican food gave me food poisoning. I was in the bathroom for like 2 hours. I was so miserable. Finally, I was like, it was 7 p.m. and I was like, I'm going to bed. Like, I have food poisoning now and I'm 40 weeks pregnant and this sucks and I'm going to bed. So it actually was not food poisoning. It was starting. Very common sign of labor is diarrhea. If you didn't know that, it's one of those beautiful birth things that we talk about often. And so I was just actually going into labor. So I slept for a couple of hours. And at this point, my husband was still in my toddler's bed because we were still kind of in that night weaning process, him and her in her like twin size bed. And so I woke up at like midnight and I was crampy. And I started measuring the contractions. They were like 5 minutes apart right away. And I was like, oh, this is much different than my first labor.
Right.
And so I got in the bath. I was like, maybe I'll just go in the bathtub and see if they like slow down or spread out. And they didn't, but the bath was really helping me to be able to cope. So I was like, I'm just going to stay in here. Like, I'm not going to wake them up. Just stay in here for as long as I can. And then I was like in there for a couple of hours. I kept like draining the tub and refilling the tub, filling it because the water was getting cold. And then finally, my husband usually wakes up around 5 a.m. for work. And I was like, it's 5:10, it's 5:15, he's not waking up. I had planned to tell him when he woke up, like, you should call my mom. Like, I think we should think about going, because I was like in pretty active labor at that point. And now we're in Amesbury and we have to drive all the way to Cambridge, which with no traffic is like 45 minutes. And this was 6 a.m. on like a Tuesday.
You're going to hit all the traffic.
So he's just not waking up and not waking up and not waking up. The one day that he doesn't set his alarm when he oversleeps is the one day where I'm like, and at this point, I was in like such active labor that I couldn't even like pick up my phone to call him. So like finally, I just grabbed my phone and texted him, come. And he had like no idea what I was talking about. He just like in a daze woke up, gave me to the bathroom, and I was like, I think we need to call my mom. And he was like, oh, okay. Should I stay home from work? Yes.
Yes.
You should stay home from work.
Yes, we're having a baby. He's like half asleep, like, oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So my mom comes over at like 6 a.m. She was going to take my daughter to the birth center with us. Because I didn't know if I wanted her there, but I wanted her close by just in case I wanted her to be there, because she was still really little. She wasn't even 3 yet. And so my mom gets there and she's like, okay, like let's get dressed so we can go. And I'm like, I can't get out of the tub. I was in very active labor. So my mom was like, if you feel like you can't get out of the tub, we really need to leave. Like right now, we need to go. I'm like, okay. So I get dressed. We get into the truck. My husband was very worried. He had just bought this brand new truck that my water was going to break in the truck. So we had like all these towels laid down. So we got to the birth center. I remember driving down 95 and asking my husband if we were in traffic, and he was like, no. And I just like opened one eye and I just saw like a flood of red lights. So we were just like in traffic the whole time. But I had taken actually a hypnobirthing class through that pregnancy. And so I had like my hypnobirthing tracks on, and I had gotten a TENS unit. Have you ever heard of a TENS unit?
Yeah.
So you can use them for labor. So you can use them on your back, and it kind of provides a little bit of like a gate control theory. So it kind of blocks the nerves from being able to get up to your brain, kind of takes some of the pain away. So I had that on, and I had my hypnobirthing, and I just like focused the whole drive there. Then we got there and I was 7.5 centimeters. So I was like nearly towards the end, and they were like, do you want to get in the tub? And I was like, absolutely. And we got into the tub. My husband got into his little bathing suit and came in the tub with me. And it was just about time to have a baby, and they checked me again. I was fully dilated, and I probably spent like an hour or two there in the tub, and then we started pushing, and my husband delivered our second baby. I delivered her. He caught her in the tub, and now he thinks he's a midwife because he delivered our second baby, but that's a whole other story.
It's a whole family event now between you and your mom and him.
And she was a girl. We didn't know what we were having. We were so shocked.
Oh my
mom has only brothers, and I have only brothers, and my pregnancy just felt really different. And I was convinced it was a boy the whole time. But after about like 5 minutes, the nurses were like, did you guys check if you have a boy and a girl? And we were like, oh my God, we didn't even think about
just a baby.
Yeah, baby. So we checked and it was a girl, and we were super excited. And then I got out of the tub and I went over to the bed, because they don't really want you to deliver your placenta in the tub at the birth center, because they want to be able to kind of like measure your bleeding. So we walked over to the bed, which was an interesting experience. So
I was gonna say, walking over.
I'm holding the baby, who's still attached to the cord, which is still attached to the placenta, which is still inside my uterus, and I'm wobbling. But I made it. And 15 minutes go by, 25 minutes go by, 30 minutes go by, 40 minutes go by. My placenta still hadn't come out yet. So they were getting a little bit worried about my placenta not having come out yet. So they did administer some like intramuscular Pitocin to kind of help to get my placenta out. And it did come out eventually. And I did have like a small hemorrhage, but they were able to just give me some extra Pitocin and some other medications, and it slowed it down right away. And I didn't have any issues after that. And then we were at the birth center, which you don't stay at the birth center like you stay at the hospital. So after a couple of hours, we went home and we had 2 babies and we did the thing. My postpartum was a lot easier that time.
Really?
I think just because I was more prepared for what to expect. And I wasn't going through as many like life changes as I did as like, you know, a youngish mother kind of like transitioning into motherhood. None of my other friends had kids. I was the first one to have kids, but by the time I had my second baby, a lot of my other friends have started getting pregnant and having kids, and that kind of leads into my story of how I became a doula, because my friends were like, oh, you're a childbirth educator and your mom's a doula and you can be our doula. And I was like, all right, I'll be your doula. And then eventually I decided I would actually do the doula training. I always said I was like too type A to be on call all the time, but that went out the window. As you know, I've probably canceled on you 7 million times because I'm out of birth. And so I did the doula training in early 2020, which was an interesting time to become a doula.
Yeah.
Yeah. And along the way, I met Ashley, who co-owns the doula agency with me, and we fell in love, and we're one human now.
You guys literally, I was gonna say 2 peas in a pod, but not even. You just share a brain. Like you are like conjoined best friends.
Yeah. We're conjoined doula people now. And we recently opened Saltwater Doulas, which is our doula agency, and we are opening a prenatal education center in Amesbury in March. So we're super excited about that. Yeah.
I can't even believe it. So excited.
Yeah, it's so funny because people always say, like, I've heard so many times, like, my birthing experience, like, made me become a doula. Like, I didn't know what a doula was before. And I do have a unique experience in where, like, I knew what a doula was and it was part of my life, but my birthing experiences really did kind of change my idea of if I wanted to do it or not. And so I do still kind of fall into that category.
I love that. That's so awesome. I think it's amazing just being able to hear the story. Because so many people say like, oh, I didn't even know it existed. And like you did, but like you had to come to your own to realize like, yep, this is what is in my realm. This is my thing. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, so amazing. Well, I'm glad that you were able to join me. Yes. Being
really?
at a birth is like is like a personality trait of a birth doula. Like canceling on everybody, it has to be. Like we get it though.
We'll make appointments with people if they are okay with knowing that I may last minute cancel. My hairdresser's on board.
I was gonna say all of your people that are normally like probably having cancellation fees. I'm sure you have to be like, but can we talk about that cancellation fee?
Talk about that cancellation fee. So yeah, it's definitely a hard job to do, but it's so rewarding that it makes it worth being on call all the time. And I always take July off, so I get a little break.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Well, thank you for joining me. I'll make sure your information's below. People should definitely check it out. Alyssa's information, but also Saltwater Doulas and the exciting new space. So if you're in the area, definitely check it out. But yes, thank you for joining me today and for sharing.
Thanks for having me. It was nice to see your face.
I know.
Have to do it in real life soon.
Yes.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Postpartum Plan podcast. I hope that today's episode brought you support, relatability, and valuable insight. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review and share with any of your prenatal and postpartum friends and family. Your feedback helps us reach more parents seeking support. And if you're looking for additional resources, please feel free to connect via Instagram at Serene Moments Doula for constant information, tips, and tricks, or check out my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com. See you next week.